Cool, great. Well, everyone, hello and welcome to the session today, Communicating Beyond Consumerism. Great start. My name is Stu, and as you can tell by that terrible introduction just then, I'm stepping in today for Natasha, as she's sadly unable to join us, just going to do a bit of chairing for this session. But the main event is actually Charlotte Zamboni, who I'm going to pass across to right now from the Global Action Plan. Over to you, Charlotte.
Wonderful. Thanks, Stu, and thanks for stepping in today and doing a bit of chairing for us. Everyone will probably be glad of that, because 45 minutes of just me is going to feel a little bit of a long session. So Stu's going to join us a little bit later to help us with a Q&A, which we're planning towards the end. So I'm from Global Action Plan, as Stu has said, and today I'd like to talk to you. I'll tell you a little bit about Global Action Plan, set the context for the conversation. Then I'd like to talk to you about post-consumerism and our work on post-consumerism, what this means and some of the harms. And then the bulk of what we'll be looking at today is values, and how if we use values as a core for our communication planning, then it helps us get to a place where we can drive action more impactfully. So there's some kind of theory on values, which I'll walk you through, and then a series of tips of how to put values into action in our communications. Then a little case study on how values can be applied to a comms campaign. I'll briefly walk you through that. And then after that, that's when Stu's going to join us, because we're going to do a kind of live example and take a topic and apply the principles to a topic and work it through together. And we're really hoping that all of you watching will chip in at that point and add some thoughts and comments. That'd be fantastic. First of all, I'm going to share my screen. Sorry, that doesn't work. Okay, actually what I might do is, seeing as we found ourselves starting with this film, I'm going to carry on and play it. So let's go, sit back and listen, and then we'll come back to the presentation.
My generation has grown up with adverts throughout our entire lives. They tell us how we should look and what we should own in order to fit in and be happy, but it's damaging, not only to the planet, but also
quite clear that a lot of adverts damage people's self-esteem, and things like adverts about being beach body ready, or even adverts for perfume and that kind of thing, they portray like bodies in a very unrealistic way.
And if you're like looking at yourself in the mirror going, I don't like this, and then you're looking at an Instagram page full of models, you're like, I don't look like this. That's not going to help you. That's not going to make you feel any better.
It's not fair on anybody. That we're supposed to be the ideology of perfect, and perfect's not real.
I think boys' body image is being sold as someone who's strong, muscular.
They think like, I want to look at the person in this advert because I know people will like me more.
It just really puts you in like a little pit where you're going a bit deeper and deeper each time you see something new.
Advertisers are using more and more sophisticated techniques to make us feel like we need certain things in order to fit in better, feel better, and to buy more than we need.
Popularity is directly involved in like what we buy and the things that we have.
It kind of leads to this idea that if you have all these products, you're going to be more successful and it's going to be easier for you.
It's a huge pressure for people my age to have to afford new clothes, shoes, cosmetics, and it really affects them mentally.
I definitely think that advertisers purposely like choose like vulnerable people to like promote their products to, just purely because it's easier to get them to like want to buy it.
The advertisers feel that they need to make us feel insecure, so we have to buy their things.
Even though we are young, we have minds of our own and we can make our own decisions. But it's hard when advertisers tell us that we have to lose weight to look good or wear specific brands to fit in.
It's not only just looks now, it's also a fake personality and an unrealistic personality. I think especially with YouTube influencers, there's a whole look, there's a way that you present yourself and the way you speak.
You start to pressure yourself and then you doubt yourself.
Trust is becoming like a big issue among like people our sort of age. Can't tell whether they're being sold something or not, and are trying like increasingly hard to distinguish between the two.
The pressure that people put on themselves, it does come from seeing these things over and over again.
It's just really horrible how companies are willing to do that as a way to get money and feel comfortable with putting across these messages all over social media and all over billboards and things, sort of aware that they're damaging people's self-esteem but will benefit financially from that.
Advertisers and influencers need to realise that they're targeting people who are still developing themselves, and you're affecting their lives, sometimes in ways that are negative and confusing. And you should know that, and you should think about that.
So everyone, that was an introduction to Global Action Plan's post-consumerism work. Right, now I will get back to the document. Sorry, everybody, struggling to get back to the document.
Hi, Charlotte. You sent me the slides before. Do you want me to share the slides for you? Would that be cool?
Yeah, that'd be brilliant. I've got stuck in YouTube. That's the problem I'm having. So thanks.
It's quite all right. Let me just quickly find them for you. Do you want to do a quick introduction to global introduction while I find these slides?
Yes, why don't we do that? So yes, great to see you, everybody, and thanks very much for joining this talk. Global Action Plan is a 30-year strong environmental strategy. Sorry, just closing down the video. So we've been going for about 30 years. What we very particularly do is look at that overlap space between what's good for us and what's good for the planet. And that means that we work on issues where that connection is most tangible. And we do a lot to work on clean air, which is another one of those really intersectional spaces. You know, the environmental harms affect our health in the here and now. But consumerism is very particularly a space where the environmental harms are very obvious, but perhaps the kind of health and well-being harms aren't always as transparent as they could be. And our work is about drawing out those links and driving action for change around those links. So Stu, are you now powering this presentation? Because I need to get on.
I've got, yeah, of course. Let me, if you can say next slide each time,
okay.
We'll do that.
This is now in your hands. You are now the Natasha. So what we're trying to do is get to this connection between human and planetary health. And what we try and do is look at the root causes of the crisis through this lens, through this connection lens of human and planetary health. And Stu, let's go on to the next slide. Wonderful. Here we are. Let's stay to this one. So, and the role that we play in this change is around mobilization. There's a lot of debate in the sector, and it probably has cropped up over the course of some of your work and thinking in your various organizations about behavior change and system change and the relationship between the two, because you know, we've spent many years as a sector focusing on individual behavior change. There's a lot of recognition now of the need of system change. But what we try and do, and I'm sure we all try and do, is connect those two things up. And so what we try and do is mobilize people and organizations so that the actions they take lead us to system change, rather than putting the onus on the individual to act and feeling like that action is in itself the answer to the problem. Because you know, as we know, the actions people can take are small, and if they're not connected up to drive system change, then we won't really get very far. And some of the thinking around that film that you've just seen, and the reason to show it, is that young people really do feel the harms of consumerism and the pressures put on them, but they do feel a bit powerless. They're told that young people are the activists, young people have to act to drive change, but it's quite hard for them to see how those actions ladder up into any real change, and that can make them feel depressed and anxious, as a lot of the stats are increasingly telling us. So the insight gathering we did around that film really helped us get to some of the solutions we've got to around our post-consumerism work. And in summary, what we've landed on is there's two ways that we're tackling consumerism and the harms of consumerism. First is to kind of really get to the systemic cause of those harms. And a lot of that is around how advertising works, and particularly how it works on young people, and the systems behind advertising. In particular, the way that advertising tracks all of our interests and our hobbies and our you know, all sorts of personal data around us, and uses that to serve as advertising. And that's a very harmful system for young people, because it continuously comes at them with more and more advertising, more and more targeted to them and their individual concerns and difficulties and desires, and the kind of the laddering up of that. It's not just the individual content that they're served, but it's the repetition of the content that's served. And I think that's come through in some of the, you know, tragic work around the Molly Russell cases. Actually, it wasn't what she saw, it's how often she saw it. So the systems that track and serve as advertising are really harmful for young people. So that was the kind of work that came out of that insight gathering that went into the film, is our long-term work on what we would call surveillance advertising. And then the other half of thinking about consumerism, and I'll come back to this in a minute as we go through some of these live examples, is providing people with a positive alternative. That actually sometimes post-consumerism is considered as a kind of deprivation, you know, all the things we can no longer have. But actually all the studies around well-being and behaviour demonstrate that if we do live in a post-consumerist way, then we're significantly happier. Our well-being is much higher, and we live much more mentally and physically beneficial lives. So post-consumerism is a positive notion, and we need to make sure that we present that positive whenever we talk about it, which is why we kind of feature this different world we're working towards rather than frame it in the negative. And that leads me on nicely to the bulk of this conversation, which is around values and how using values to frame our comms gets us to this positive space. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about some values theory. And yes, Stu, it's fine to go on to you're anticipating well, so I don't have to do the tedious next one, Stu, which could get a little bit repetitive for everyone. And I'd be really interested in how many of you recognise this and use it in your work, and you know how much of a role that values currently plays with you, and whether I'm telling you something you already know or whether this is relatively new to you. So do pop some thoughts in the chat as I'm speaking. And great, Kathy, to see that you do use it. Be really interested when we come to the end of this conversation, and we open ourselves up for a bit more chat, you know, for any thoughts you've got about how you framed it in the past. But for those like Emily, for whom it's new to, I'll talk you through the headline theory, and then do come back to us and come back to Global Action Plan if you'd like to discuss it a little bit further. There is some Schwartz in there, yes, you'll recognise that. So what value the values map shows us is that we all have a selection of values that go on in our head at any one time. And they tend to be grouped in certain areas. And what we have are a set of compassionate values that we all hold, often called intrinsic values in the sector. And those are the values that lead us to behave in societally, culturally, and environmentally positive ways. So you'll see things like wisdom and equality, protecting the environment, inner harmony, all those things that are kind of what we call universal values, which are kind of caring for other values. And then there's a set of kindness values in there around benevolence, the benevolent space. And that's where, you know, friendship and meaning and a little bit of spirituality come in. Then on the other side of that, we've got a set of values, which are called the self-interest values, which can sound a little bit judgmental. And in a sense, you know, we do all hold these things and we need to have all these values to direct ourselves forward. You know, that's why I think that self-direction is an achievement in here. These are the values that make us get up and go and make stuff happen. And they're fine, aren't they, when they're in harmony as a full set. When you've got all those things going on and you're not out of balance, then you've got a kind of healthy and productive mindset. But when any one of these value sets becomes predominant, then what happens is you crowd out the others. We've only got so much space. And if one set kind of blossom, then the others by definition diminish, which is why for inspiring environmental action, it's incredibly important that we enhance those positive values in our comms, and that we don't inadvertently dial up some of those less helpful values in terms of environmental action, helpful for your career maybe, but slightly less helpful for your environmental action. So that's the values map. We'll go on a bit and apply these in a little bit more detail, if that's okay, Stu. So we, at different times, we place more importance in some of these values than in other ones. This is all work done by the wonderful Common Cause Foundation. Really, if you're interested in this, really worth going and having a look at all of their information on it, because it's absolutely fascinating. If we go on to the next slide, Stu. So an example would be, you know, you do an environmental behavior and you come back from that, and the next slide will show you, once we kind of how in your head that affects the balance between your extrinsic and your intrinsic values. So your compassionate values have kind of filled your head and are making you feel wonderful and will be propelling you on to further action, which is the really important point, because that now is your predominant way of thinking and your predominant motivation. So you're thinking, fantastic, I want to do more, that feels great. But then if you come on to do some of what those young people were talking about, and say we go out and we do a bit of mad shopping and retail therapy. Sorry, Stu, we are on the next slide. You were right, your instincts were right. So we spend the day out in Westfield, or we're tripping up and down Oxford Street. You know, we're all human, we all do it. But if we look at the next slide, and we'll see that then how that, oh, actually, that one should be the other way around. Spot the deliberate mistake. The purple balloon will push out the green balloon and get bigger and bigger. Exactly. There you go. And so in the end, it crowds out some of that positive compassion and becomes our go-to. And that's in a sense what consumerism is, the damage that consumerism is doing, and why consumerism, it's, you know, obviously the resource use it derives is damaging, the mental health issues that arise from it are damaging, but also the space that it takes up in our value system is ultimately a damage, because it crowds out that time that we might have spent doing things that are better for us, better for our community, and better for the planet. So it's an important consideration. Let's crack on. So how do they interact with each other? There's a sort of seesaw effect, basically. So if we activate one set, we weaken the other set. And there's also a bleed over effect. And I'll summarize all this because we're not trying to get into the absolute technicalities of value here, but I just wanted to establish some of these principles. So in this bleed over effect, if you affect one in the group, that then the others that are close to it, they're not close because it's random scattering, they're close because they're affected, so co-related. So you know, the more helpful you are, the more forgiving you become, and the more honest you become, so that they impact on each other. So let's move on. What do we want to do in our comms? Basically, we want to activate compassionate values, because the more we encourage people to use them, the more they'll do them, the more positive action will arise as a result of it. So let's move on. Now, I just wanted to briefly talk you through another really important principle that we apply to a lot of our comms at the moment. Be really interested in what you all think of this. This is something called the values perception gap. And basically, it starts with the premise that people are compassionate. So if you ask people whether they're compassionate as individuals, they say they are. But if you ask them whether other people are compassionate, they say they don't think other people are that compassionate. So you end up with a values perception gap, is that we're basically, close to 90% of us are decent, good, compassionate people who want to do good stuff. But we think much less of each other, partly because of media narratives and all the things you can imagine. And that inhibits us in acting, because if we think we are the only ones that feel in a certain way, then we hold back on acting on that feeling because we feel uncomfortable. We'll be the odd ones out. We feel we'll be judged, particularly young people. And so we sort of hold back. So if we perpetuate this notion that we are all compassionate, then what we do is we unlock action, because if we all think, I feel the same as everyone else, we all feel that this is a good thing to do, that'll mean I'll feel okay about doing it and people won't judge me for doing it. So it's a really important principle. So we've got some tips then as to how we would put that principle into action in our comms, and I'll go through those tips now. We'll move on actually from that one because that makes the point similarly. Right, let's get on to the tips, because this is where we start getting into the practical. So these are some of the things that we've worked up, that the kind of difference it makes if you adopt these principles in your comms work. So if we start with a framing that assumes that people are compassionate and play that back to them, then that means that the way that you frame, say, our clean air work, we'd always talk about clean air as being something that everybody cares about, because the data says they do, that is important to everybody and that we all want to act on. And that what we tell people is all of the action that's happening on it. So we make action on clean air feel normal. Now you could say, well, not everyone understands the harms of clean air, so we've got to tell people it's the biggest environmental immediate threat to our lives and all of those kind of things, and no one's doing anything about it, and isn't terrible, no action's being taken because nothing's being done about this and nothing like enough is being done about this. But that feeds into the values perception gap, because people think, well, I'm worried about clean air, but clearly no one else is. If nothing's happening on it, then I won't do anything. And this is a really important point more widely with kind of businesses as well, and why the green hush thing is really quite damaging, because if businesses don't talk about their action, then we think, well, businesses don't care, no one really cares, businesses aren't doing anything on clean air, so I won't do it. So again, it's really important that we all speak out about what we're doing, and that we all encourage businesses, even in this difficult space around kind of green wash and all the accusations for business. It's really important that we encourage businesses to do something and say they're doing something, so that we continue to reinforce that action is happening and that we are all normal and wanting action to happen. So tip 2. So this is a one around how we motivate, and this is a bit of a trap that charities can fall into, and environmental sector can fall into, is that we get people to do stuff because of their compassion. We don't get people to do stuff through self-interest. And that might sound obvious, but sometimes, say, for example, people go on runs and they get medals, and there's a little bit of kind of, we'll give you a prize. Sometimes if we say, we want you to take part in this and we'll give you 50 quid or something like that, that's fine if you just want immediate behavior. But if you're trying to embed intrinsic change in your audience, and you're wanting them to do something with deep motivation rather than just immediate gratification, then you have to be very careful that you're not offering the self-interest incentives that just then feel a little bit unsatisfying. If the only reason you do something is because you get an immediate reward for it, then the reward's never quite right or enough, and you haven't addressed that right. And I mean, most of the charitable sector is pretty good on this. We do a lot of youth work. Schools sometimes get this a little bit wrong, looking at how they might motivate students through self-interest rather than through compassion, to be kind of rounded human beings. So one to watch. Next tip. This is a really interesting one around kind of challenging that values perception gap through the role models we use. We did some really interesting work with Virgin Media O2 about what are the values perception gap barriers for young men in climate action. And part of the problem for young men is that while they do care as much about social environmental issues as young women, as anyone does, and the stats showed us they don't feel able to act on their feelings because they don't see any role models like them talking about caring about climate change, they might see a lot of young women, but they don't see any young men, and they particularly don't see any diverse young men. So we had great fun with a People Just Do Nothing podcast with Hugo and Sipa, who kind of addressed this whole issue and got, we had some great stats about how they persuaded young men to feel more able to talk about climate change, diverse young men, because they were really honest about how they couldn't talk about it and how you fear of being judged and, all the challenges that you have. So that's something important for us as a sector. It's great to be putting Greta up there and all her wonderful work, but let's be really careful that actually inadvertently we're not perpetuating some of the barriers that exist for other people by always using the same role models. It's really important we diversify that. Tip 3. So this is about acknowledging the wider system and making sure that you show collective action, because seeing individuals act makes it all feel a little bit lonely and a little bit hard and a little bit difficult, whereas lots of people acting together on something makes it feel possible and makes you feel that you're like everybody else. You're the norm. There's a big group of us doing it. We're part of a bigger movement. So that's important for things like imagery, comms imagery, showing lots of people, showing collective action, that we don't show individuals and make them feel alone. And then finally, the 5th one, and this I'm sure you will all be working to this and the kind of solutions mentality and how important it is. And it's something that sector's really coming round to. But if we think about it in a values context of sort of how those solutions need to be there, crowding out the kind of negatives, it helps frame how we think of those solutions and how we talk about them. And I'm just going to go on quickly now, just to a 2-minute case study on how we put this into practice. And then Stu and I are going to have a little chat about a live example and get a little bit of feedback from all of you. So there's a way that you can go into kind of audience uniting principles, following on from that last point about how we drive collective action, not individual action. And there's a 3-step process. You'll see the source of it there, the UK Race Class Narrative Report. And it's a great piece of guidance, and we've been playing around putting this into practice. So it basically starts with 3 questions. And the first stage is thinking about shared values as your opening point for your comms, the start point. So what do we all agree on and what do we all hold common with each other? Rather than starting with the problem or the issue, let's start with the shared value. So I'm going to talk you through Flickers of the Future, a campaign that we did. We started with the shared value that everybody wants to feel a bit more hopeful about the future, that we're all fed up with feeling negative, and that actually that we're all united in the fact that positive visions of the future are just what we need right now. So that was our shared value. We knew lots of people cared about that and cared about positivity and cared about talking positively to young people to soothe anxiety and all those kind of things. So that was our start point. Then the next bit for that kind of comms example is sorry, Stu, I've already jumped ahead on you there. Let's go on to the next one. Thank you very much. So this one is about the next stage is let's be really specific about the problem and what's causing the problem. And it says who there, but who isn't in any way designed to be individuals, because finger pointing individuals is counter to a kind of values framing. This is about the system that's causing it. So what's going wrong? Why are we only seeing, where is the problem being driven from, and what system is driving that problem? And then one of the ways we looked at this was looking at, say, broadcast content and film content, and the fact that so often the way that climate change is portrayed in the filmmaking and kind of programming world and drama is around, the negative. It's the snow train doom and gloom scenario where we see terrible dystopian futures presented to us. We don't very often see programming and films that have hugely positive, sustainable futures. It's just a kind of massive gap. So we don't really see it. So we haven't really got something to aspire to. So the problem is not enough content around positive futures and too much content around dystopian futures. I've got quite a specific answer to that. So I've already answered the next slide, Stu. Sorry, I'm making this even harder for you. So show a solution. So what we decided to do is bring in youth voices to broadcast content. So we ran a competition. We got across film schools across the country. We got 102 young people, young filmmakers creating positive future concepts that would reframe the way we think about the future. And then we're pitching those to broadcast and TV. So we kind of came in with a specific solution to a specific brief that would then solve the problem. So that's an example, very quickly flick through. What Stu and I are going to do now is we're going to run that again, and we'd love a bit of feedback from all of you. So what we thought we'd do is take Black Friday as a consumerist proposition, and one that I wonder if some of you might already do campaigning on. We've over the years, each year, we've always done a kind of Black Friday moment, talking about the harms of Black Friday. Others of you might. In previous years, we've sort of gone out and said, you know, it's awful, the kind of destruction that it causes, and you know, it encourages us to all waste even more resources. And we've gone out with the scary stories about lakes drying up and told it that way. And you know, there is a role for that. But when we then applied this values framing to it, it allowed us to start with a different start point that felt more unifying. And I suppose the point for this little bit of chat that we've got remaining for us is how we can stop divisiveness and how we can have collective kind of thinking, collective campaigns as a sector, how we bring people with us. And that's where the shared value mindset comes from. It brings people into the topic rather than pushes them away with problems. So, Stu, let's get started.
Great, cool. So I'm going to stop screen sharing if that's all right. There we go, cool. So in terms of that, are we looking at what shared values are threatened by Black Friday? So if anyone wants to put that in the chat, and if not, then Charlotte and I will go through this together. But if anyone has any thoughts, please do put it in the chat function now. What shared values are threatened by Black Friday? I'm going to let that hang.
I'll have a start while everyone's having a little thing. So we'll want to avoid waste. Actually, great, you've already started. Yeah, we didn't need you to have resource consumption. Brilliant one. Yeah, that's definitely something that we feel it threatens. Anybody else want to throw in some?
Alice says no one likes owning loads of stuff they don't need.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, peer pressure, that's an interesting one. Throwaway culture, equality, I mean, that's a shared value. We hate feeling panicked or pressured. I think that's a shared value.
Immoral chain supplies.
Keeping up with Joneses, I think that's a really interesting one. That gets to, you know, because with Black Friday, there are some of those kind of British values that we thought there's a sort of fairness thing, you know, all this kind of barging in front of me in the queue, you know, all that queuing chaos. That's a sort of, you know, we all object to that because we're British and you know, people should stand orderly in queues, and Black Friday threatens that. Chaotic process, yes, exactly. Speaking to that point. Yes, that's it. I think the American point's really interesting. There's a sort of shared British value that somehow we're being infiltrated by kind of harmful kind of American notions of consumerism. Yes, the fake thing. I think the fact that we're being tricked, that's a kind of shared value. We hate being tricked as British people. That kind of unites us, doesn't it? The fact that it's fake and it's not real anyway. Toxic competitiveness, yeah. Brilliant. Lots of great ideas here.
Yeah. Keep them coming. This seems like
yeah. There's plenty of values it threatens. So it's obviously either we're speaking to a very attuned audience, or Black Friday in itself is quite a quality over quantity is threatened. Yeah. Yes, good value to play on, isn't it? Fantastic.
I think that is that shared value certainly is one that you hear, is the fact that it starts earlier and earlier each year in terms of early November from 9/11.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, buying things that last like that. Yeah. No time to think. Yes, crowds you out, just all you spend all your time consuming, and there's no time just to kind of relax and be yourself. Yes, I think all those things that we feel very, very outraged and rightly anxious about the harms that it perpetuates. Disillusion stuff will make us happier. I think that's a really important point, and we've got some really good evidence about how actually the kind of fake happiness is more dangerous to us, because you get an illusion of happiness which lets you down, and that makes you feel worse afterwards. Yes, increasing the size of big businesses, we don't like that. Yeah, I'd straight on to the other one, make people buy on credit. That's terrible, and even more so in the cost of living crisis.
Oh, they just keep coming. This is amazing.
They do keep coming.
Can we move on to the?
Yes, let's move on to the next one. I like that last one about, people, that all anyone cares about is that bargain hunting, and that really as a society is that what's important to us, and is that a value that we want to share. So some of these are kind of, I suppose, things that unite us against values that we all hold, and in a sense the positive is that we all think that equality and fairness are important, and those are things that we want to hold on to, and kind of the preciousness of our time, and that we want to be positive about the fact that we don't want to compete and be seen better than, we want to be one with our family rather than spending Christmas Day kind of showing off about who's bought what for who. They're still coming, keep them coming, but let's move on to stage 2, because actually some of these are straying, and actually particularly that loss of high street independence I think comes probably under step 2, which is who is being harmed. Sorry, Stu, let me.
Oh no, that's fine. I was just I'm being a terrible fake Natasha. So who's being harmed?
I'm being worse because I'm leaving out. You go for it.
Who's being harmed? And again, if everyone wants to put that in the chat, or Charlotte, if you want to lead in the conversation now, as well.
Yep, fantastic. Our planetary resources hugely depleted, terrible harms. Yeah, I think that personal harm, I think that's so important, such an important point. Terrible for local economy and local businesses. All of these. Yeah, our values are being harmed. Absolutely right. Parents, kids, those pressures.
Yeah. Sweatshops, poorly paid labour, wildlife. Devaluing of handmade gifts. I like that one. Personal bank balances and buying too much.
Yeah. And the good thing about all these harms is they're really wide ranging, but each one in themselves are kind of interesting pivot points for conversations. I mean, that point relationships, I think that's fascinating, and there's really interesting campaigns. If you come with a shared value to Black Friday and talk about how, that our time spent being eroded, and actually what's suffering is relationships, it gives you a really interesting spin on it as a campaign. It's really powerful stuff to kind of pivot from.
I've noticed we've got 6 minutes left of this session, so shall we move on to the next question? On the, cool. Who is causing the harm then?
So what do we think? Some of it's already cropped up. We've had some sort of global yeah, it's always Jeff. Oh, good, Jeff again. Do we blame ourselves? Interesting question. Corporations, capitalism, can't escape that one. Profit, the kind of GDP structures, need for growth. Social media, massively so. And sort of targeted advertising, back to that point. Social pressure. Yeah, do you think economic growth and the need for growth? Everyone. I'm not sure we're getting to the most specific comms campaign. We're just going to blame everyone.
Great.
Right, let's move on to solutions.
Yeah, cool.
Because we've only got a minute or two. And
yeah.
There's
what is the solution? Totally. So what is the solution? The positive framing. How would the world be better without Black Friday?
So let's try and think about this slightly from a kind of values lens. So what could we do? What values could we enhance? Thinking about kind of filling the brain with the green stuff. Yes, sharing time, not gifts. You see, that's a brilliant one. Increase meaning in life. Supporting local. These are all really nice values things, and they feel really positive. Yeah, focusing on helping others. Green Friday, love that. We've got enough darkness this winter, enough dark narratives. I think there's something really exciting about recasting, getting rid of the word black in the first place, and just trying to get us to more caring and societally beneficial framing. Time, not stuff. I mean, that's a simple but powerful concept.
Use the data and time to create something instead. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mutual aid, libraries of things instead of ownership of things.
Yeah. Charity, not consumerism, protecting the environment. Use the data volunteer. That's a lovely idea. That would be a great Black Friday campaign, wouldn't it? And that's going to fill you up with nice, positive green values. Now, what I hope is all this wonderful positive stuff is inspiring you all. Appreciate you haven't got very long to go back to your comms team, or if you are the only member of the comms team, to throw together a very powerful Black Friday campaign. And the purpose of this conversation wasn't to inspire you all to go and put a Black Friday campaign together if you haven't already got one planned, but it was to think about how to reflect on if you follow this three-step process, does it add a bit of richness to the way that you're planning your comms, and starting with that kind of shared value piece, building out from that, and that assumed caring, that assumed collective mindset, does that get you to a slightly different place? So any last questions in the last 2 minutes, or thoughts to share? Certainly had lots of chat, 99+ responses. That's lovely to see.
Do you think focus on well-being strays into self-interest, motivation? It's one of the last questions here. I'm just looking at the time. We got time for one question. So.
Well-being has become annoyingly become a word that's sort of had other agendas piled on top of it, and it is frustrating that's happened, because there isn't a better word really, and a better way of describing the outcome of this positive way of living. I think our conclusion is you just have to carry on talking about well-being as a positive thing, and if there is a sort of commercial arm to well-being and that's building itself online, that doesn't mean that we don't keep steering into the principles, those 5 ways of well-being, which I'm sure you all use and really hope that you do, because they're such important principles for societal and environmental good. So the word has been a little bit adopted by others, but we just have to keep filling the space with the right meaning of it, really, and steer our course, I would say.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Charlotte, and thank you everyone for those amazing suggestions. As we've said in a few sessions, we are going to download the chat and kind of either summarize it or kind of pull out links where they're useful and such. So I don't know how we're going to summarize that one, other than that was just a really great exercise. So thank you so much, Charlotte, and thank you everyone for joining. The next session will be at 2 o'clock, and look forward to seeing you there. Thank you again.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks so much for all the feedback. Wonderful. And do get in touch if you'd like to chat about it.